Welcome to Bloom Today. We have a grace-filled show for you. We're going to be talking about those without sin.
Hi, I'm Paula Wallace, president of Bloom in the Dark, and this is
Jenny Priz, the single-handed serenity coach. Welcome to Bloom Today, where we talk about internal and external brokenness and how you can heal,
so that you can use the fertilizer of your past to bloom today. Hey, welcome everybody. Today we are talking about those without sin, except for the rest of that saying is those without sin should cast the first stone.
Right, because if we were actually talking about those without sin, we
have nobody to talk about.
We wouldn't have much of a show at all. We wouldn't be able to talk about anyone, except for Jesus, possibly.
Yeah, and he's not here in person, so we're getting to talk about the fact that we all have sin.
Absolutely. But somehow we all want to judge everyone else's sin as, I don't know, deeper, more important than anything that we've ever done.
Right, or we do the opposite and judge our sin as the worst in the whole wide world, and everyone else can be forgiven except us, and we make it where it's destructive at a whole new level. But
that's the one that I did all the time. No, it's just me. I'm so awful.
Right, and I played with both. It's just whichever way the pendulum was swinging at that particular time was either I'm better than because I don't have their sin.
I'm not as bad as they are.
No, I'm definitely not like one of those people. And the comedy of that is the fact that Jesus never judged those people that were open and acknowledging their sin. What he did do was judge the people who were like the other end of my spectrum, which is but I would never do that. That is, I am better than that. I would not choose that sin. And where we're being self-righteous and judgmental, and Jesus was not too kind to those people.
No, who thought they were better than everyone else because
Yes.
they performed better than everyone else.
And they look better on the outside.
Right,
or
that's
they,
really what it was, because even just that self-righteousness in itself is
pride.
Is sin and pride, exactly. And so for myself, walking through life and not having any familiarity with certain sins, those are the people that I would tend to judge more so than anyone else, because I didn't understand why they would choose that kind of a sin. So for example, with addicts, alcoholics, before I knew I was an alcoholic, I judged them as completely weak. That what is wrong with them, that they just couldn't stop. Why was this such a problem? Couldn't they see it for their own eyes? Why were they so blind? Why would they continue to choose something that was so terrible for them and had such a hard impact on their life? But then I also assumed that anyone who is an alcoholic was immediately living under a bridge and homeless and, the extreme version of complete brokenness.
Rather than the functional alcoholic?
Absolutely. So you can imagine for me, when I found out I was a functional alcoholic, what do I do with this information? And all of a sudden it turns the tables of I'm this huge failure, and put all kinds of the shame that I was pointing my finger at everybody else. Now all of a sudden I'm pointing it at myself and understanding it in a whole new light, and had a lot to work through to come to terms with the reality of what it actually meant to choose these things, and how it wasn't just as clear cut and dry the way I thought it was, where it's just, oh, well, then you just stop drinking. Oh, but if that's the way that I've learned to cope for years and years and years, and there's a slow progression over time, and it's not for the reasons that I thought it was. Because the drinking was never about the drinking. It was about the emotions, the escape, exactly. Something that I was trying to feel better was really what I was looking for, and I just didn't know how.
Yeah, well, I got raised with that. We're going to do everything right. Perfection is what you're supposed to do, what you're called to do. And where the behaviors, putting on that facade of perfect behavior, perfect excellence, perfect whatever, was more important than a lot of other things, than most things. And so you would look at all of those who were not performing that well as, like you said, weak or in my case, stupid, clueless. They just, why didn't they just? And when I was 18 was the first time I realized how it felt to be totally out of control in an area. And that was with the food addiction thing where, why couldn't I just stop binge eating? Why couldn't I just not? And I realized, wait a second, when I judged those people that were sitting there eating too much at a buffet, I had no compassion. But when I was the one sitting there stuffing food into my mouth at bizarre levels, I suddenly knew what it felt like on the inside for that person that was sitting there hurting and having food be the thing that gave them comfort.
Right.
And later on, after my divorce, and I was hurting and broken, then I acted out in a range of different ways that I had said I would never do that. And then when...
That's so fun. That phrase just follows us around, doesn't it? Oh, no, I'd never do that.
I would never say never. It's not a good idea. Because then when I kind of woke up to what I was choosing, and I was like, God, why? I don't want to do this. Why did I choose this? And he's like, Paula, I really couldn't use you to speak hope and healing into people while you were judging. So I had to smash self-righteousness just completely out the window by you seeing that under the right set of circumstances, you were just as broken and just as likely to make every bad decision as anybody else. And took that pride, just obliterated it in my life.
It has the first, who has no sin can cast the first stone.
But it doesn't work. And when we find ourselves in that place, it's all of a sudden, that what it did for me was open my eyes to understand that really the phrase there, but for the grace of God, go I. Yes. That I thought, I'd never, ever do that. And so judged those people until it finally became clear, I could be just as susceptible to these things as anyone else. We actually are all broken. And that's where, when we start understanding that everyone's broken, and there's major ways that we show that brokenness, kind of extremes on the spectrum. And I, part of my time, did the self-righteous judgmental extreme of brokenness. Yeah. It's still broken. It's not healthy. It's not balanced. It's not compassionate. It's not loving. It is not kind when you're criticizing and critiquing and judging and evaluating those around you, even if you're not saying it. The attitude, the heart, the internal aspect of it. You read the Bible, God says all kinds of things about that not being okay. And Jesus in person said all kinds of things about that not being okay.
And it does come from a place of needing to feel secure personally. I spent a whole lot of time judging people. I made that was how I made friends when, earlier in high school, college, young adult years. That's what I did. That's how I knew was, we have something in common. We hate the same things, or we find the same things annoying. And what that does is, I thought it was bringing us together, but it's just separating. It's really just separating and isolating, and it's not encouraging and causing anyone to bloom in any way. And Jesus talks about the parable of the two men who go into the temple to pray. And the first one who is saying, thank you, God, for not making me like them.
And then the them that's sitting there beating his chest going, God, I'm so broken. I'm so desperate for you because I've messed everything up. I'm a failure. I'm lost.
And then in Luke 8:14, it says, I tell you, this man, meaning the one who is asking for mercy rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.
Which is so important when we look at those places in our own life and realize that it is coming out of brokenness. The fear of other people's judgment, and we judge them first so that we can try to feel better about ourselves, or that comparison when it comes to the brokenness and how, well, I've made better choices with my brokenness. I'm a workaholic instead of an alcoholic. Woohoo! It's still doing damage to your family. It's still
doing damage to you and your relationship with God and your relationship with others. It still has the potential for actually generational problems as well. So it's not really any better.
And then there's that more codependent style need for love and acceptance, right? That's kind of mid-spectrum where we're sitting there making it a socially acceptable, I just want love. I just want to...
Don't put that all on the codependence, okay?
No.
That's everybody. That's every single person needs love and acceptance. And if you don't,
Absolutely.
if you haven't had it, especially from the foundation, then you become more and more desperate for it the more that you lack that love and acceptance.
Well, and when you have the brokenness and abuse, that proves to you you're not worth anything and proves to you that you deserve the damage and pain and hurtfulness.
That's a quote unquote
because that's the
proves.
lie. Because that's the lie you have a tendency to believe as that victim. Then your desperation for that love and acceptance grows way beyond healthy boundaries and shows up in codependence, shows up in destructive things where we're needing something because we're counteracting that damage, and then it becomes its own extreme.
Absolutely.
And
it's a basic human need, and those of us who see others as completely desperate, well, we may not understand that what they have in their past is the abuse or brokenness that they're trying to cover up because it's not socially acceptable to talk about that necessarily.
Right, and shame and guilt and all those things tell us people won't love us or accept us if we admit to these areas of quote-unquote shameful brokenness, especially sexual brokenness. There's those taboo areas that shift how we see what we can admit or what we can talk about, or our family history or style says that is a thing you can't ever, ever, ever admit to, which leads us into God has to be the one that fills that. Or it is a constant, desperate need.
He created us to be in relationship with him, to have that love and belonging filled, have that that hurt and damage healed.
In addition to having human love and acceptance, that he wants that for us. He wants healthy marriages and healthy families and healthy friendships and healthy community relationships. That's so important. And then
the enemy tries to steal, kill and destroy.
Twist, mess up. And that's where codependency is a thing where that's just a good thing that's twisted, that's not healthy. But then we have the other end of the spectrum where we're talking about the obvious damaging addictions, whether it's an addiction to pornography or to alcohol or to drugs, or the things that are easy to identify as, oh, well, that's broken. When the fact is, they're all equally broken.
Right. Absolutely. And they're all equally coming from a place of brokenness to start with. And if we are judging people based on the results of the brokenness, then we're never going to be able to form compassion for them and help them and love them the way God has instructed us to love each other, so that we can restore those relationships, restore the broken places of our heart where we've needed to bring God in, but then also bring community in for that love and support as well.
Yeah, and I realized once I understood my brokenness, it was actually harder for me to extend compassion to the self-righteous, judgmental person who's broken, and that's the way their brokenness is showing up, than it was to show compassion to the obvious addict or the homeless person or whatever. I was like, wait a second. God calls me to love and bless and do good and have compassion and extend hope and healing to everybody.
Absolutely. And we have a guest today who I'm excited to bring on, who is an author and a speaker, in addition to having 28 years of recovery from a 25-year porn addiction. Lynn Fredrick, would you come and join us in the kitchen?
Do you mind giving him a hand, Jenny?
I would absolutely love to give him a hand. Lynn, this hand's for you.
Well, thank you. If it wasn't for many people lending me a hand, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have the sobriety I do. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. We're glad to have you. Please come. Sit at our table in our kitchen. We're happy to have you here.
It's a beautiful home.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, your book is Stand Firm, right? And it's from the darkness of pornography and sexual sin to the light of God's grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a beautiful topic because it's always, like we say, covered in shame, right? So much of the time.
Well, it is. I could really relate to what you were both talking about. There's such fear. I lived a lot of my life in fear of, if somebody knew, somebody knew that I was sexually abused, by a neighbor. And
How young were you?
I was 9 years old, and I finally just recently learned that it wasn't sexual abuse. That's a new, politically correct term. I was raped.
Yes.
You've got to put it the way it really was.
Right.
But I didn't want to talk about it. I had such fear.
Of course. Because
if somebody found that out, especially in the church, well, what did you do?
To deserve that. Or to attract it.
Of course. So I had those feelings, and that, there was a lot of things happened to me when I was 9 years old. My brother had a lot of anger, and I didn't really understand why then. So he was very abusive toward me. Actually put me in the hospital for 30 days, and with a pitchfork to the head, it's not.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, but
That's
there was
intense.
a lot of other abuses of hitting and, hunting me with a gun and with the intent to do me in.
To shoot you, yeah.
I was, so I had a lot of fear, but who am I going to tell? Again, if I tell, back then, that's 40 some years ago. I mean, people would have said, well, what did you do? What did you do to cause him to be so angry with you?
Right.
I didn't know that he was angry because he had also been sexually abused. I mean, that comes out, 60 years later.
Right.
But, there was things that happened to me that set the stage for who I was becoming. Mm-hmm. And in that same time, a group of older boys handed me a stack of pornography to keep me busy so I wouldn't be in their way for a half a day. And now I tell my oldest, or not my oldest brother, but my one brother in between, I said, well, that really worked. Kept me busy for 28 years.
Yeah, wow.
The pieces inside of my head and the learning that was happening was that, sex kind of made me feel better, but it really was in a dysfunctional place. It wasn't the way it was intended to be. And the abuse made me feel like I really deserved to be abused. And I would isolate myself to be alone a lot and alone to be sexual. Well, when you're married, that doesn't really work too well. You can't. So it worked well when I was a little boy. I could do some self-nurturing and I seemed to cope and be able to get along. But as the older I got, the more that coping mechanism wasn't working in real relationships, it was actually bringing destruction to the relationships where I couldn't have relationships, not good ones anyway. But the fear was there. Now, if I tell somebody about all of this stuff, what are they going to do with me? And I complicated the matters by going to college and getting a degree in psychology and in theology. I became a pastor, and I'm like, okay, now I can solve all my own problems because I'm really godly and I know a lot of scripture.
Interesting.
Or not.
So that was a way that you're really you're trying to help yourself.
Trying to help
the best
myself.
way you understood.
Right. But I realized, as time went on, that I couldn't help myself. I had to learn to surrender to the fact that I couldn't. And that was hard for me because I was very much a do-it-yourselfer, accomplishing kind of person that could accomplish anything except help myself.
So what made the change? Was there something specific that happened?
Yeah, after 20 years of marriage, my wife had kind of had who I was, and I was two different people. I was Jekyll and Hyde. I was a good person and on the outside, but the people closest to me saw the person that wasn't so good. And I came home to a note that she wanted a divorce, and I was in a huge 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home at the time, and it was empty. And I called a counselor that I had been seeing, a Christian counselor, and the very thing I had feared all my life happened to me. When I told him over the phone, I said, I think what's really going on, and I've never told anybody, is I have a secret attraction to pornography, and I think that's what's going on inside of me. And he said, really? He said, I think you're too far gone for anybody to help you.
Wow.
And it was the very
breaks my
rejection, that I had thought was going to happen to me, that judgment that you talked about of the Pharisee, and happened to me. Well, the good thing that man did was hand me a number. It was a telephone number for somebody in New York City. He said some secret group called the Augustine Fellowship. I was scared to death when I called that number, and on the other end, I found that I wasn't alone. It was Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and it's no longer a secret organization. And it began the journey of learning that there were other people like me. And I started going to recovery groups, and then from that went to professional counseling, began a relationship over a long period of time with a counselor, and began to go deep inside of me to find out what was it in the core of me that was wrong.
And what you found then was not just the addiction itself. It was what was beyond that. The pain beyond that was the actual issue.
And that's what needed to change. Right. I could change not looking at pornography maybe, but really would that change me? Not at all. And I think that is the journey that God set me on through the whole process, was that I needed to be changed. I needed to, and when you, at least for me, dealing with pornography is an addiction that's very similar to idolatry, where I really replaced God with another God. And so God did not deliver me in the sense of the big magic wand, even though, boy, did I want that.
Yeah. Of course, we all do.
Every day.
I don't want to work that hard, But it was this journey that he put me on to be able to take every thought captive, everything that was going on up here in my brain, everything that I believed, my behaviors, why did I behave the way I behaved? Well, it was the way I thought. And I had to take all of those thoughts and say, well, are they God's thoughts? Or are these my thoughts? Or are they somebody else's? Or are they from the trauma that happened to me when I was young? A lot of it came from that trauma.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it I picked up along the way. But by taking those thoughts captive, by replacing them with God's thoughts, in that process, I began to think as God thinks. And my behaviors started to change. And in that, it's a transformation process that happens. And I love the scripture about being transformed by the renewal of your mind. Transform is a metamorphosis, is a Greek word, means to be a metamorphosis, a complete change. It's kind of like from a caterpillar to a butterfly.
Yeah, right.
And to be the renewal is a carpenter word. Surprised that God would use a carpenter word, and I'm a carpenter, so I just love the word. But to be rebuilt. So it's like a renovation project. So if you've ever renovated a house, where you take out old stuff and you put in the new stuff,
sometimes
it's like the old kitchen, you took it all out, you bring in the new kitchen, and you go, wow, what a transformation. Well, that's what should be in our life. When we take the before pictures of our life, here I am broken and shattered without the power of God in my life. But when that power of God comes into my life through His Word, and we are transformed through that, we sit back and say, whoa, man, what a change. And that's what God has brought to me. What a change.
What was the moment then for you where you felt like you were really, we call it blooming. We were finally coming out of that dark place.
Oh, I think, when the behavior started to change, where I realized I wasn't, like we call it, people in recovery call it white knuckling, where it's like, I'm not going to do it, where that was no longer going on. And it started to change from the inside to where I think of a young pastor when this first happened in my life, and I was 38 years old at that time, and I talked with him, and he said, Lynn, if you stick to recovery and you stick to the work and you stick to the transforming power of God and you keep working your program, there'll come a day when the very thing that attracted you will repulse you. And I'm like, no way. I mean, I couldn't see that, at all.
Right.
But now that's the case. I have come to a place where the very thing that attracted me, I know the truth of it now to the inside.
And God restored your marriage.
Actually, no.
He gave you a new marriage,
Right.
because I know you're married and you have
Right.
a beautiful wife. So
Yes, it's that's the unfortunate part of sometimes when we begin a journey with God, He transforms our life, but our mate has to do the same thing. We have to both have to enter that process. And at that time, my ex-spouse did not choose to do that.
right, but God blessed you and
Over,
brought.
that took about 14 years, and then my marriage ended, and I am remarried now for 10 years. I've been with my wife Terry for nearly 13, and I have the marriage now that I never had, because. And it's not blaming anyone. I have the marriage I never had because I am now who I am.
Right.
I am a new person.
Yes.
And I am just grateful that my wife Terry knows me now as the new person.
Yes. New coping
awesome.
skills, new interactions, new ideas from your mind, from your heart.
Right.
And your interactions are different from what they once were.
Exactly.
God can renew and restore.
He can. He gives second chances and new life.
Isn't that amazing? And just seeing how that pans out, and now watching what you're doing through your book, through a desire to help the young people understand getting help in that brokenness so they don't choose the coping mechanism like you did of addiction.
Right.
But even more than that, watching your heart for changing the sex and porn industry by reversing and going into the let's stop the demand for it. Let's not go to that addiction, because that enslaves other people as they are being forced to feed that addiction. And
Which is why, Lynn, you are our ex-victim of the week.
Oh,
So thank you so much for coming
you.
in. This is
Well, thank
this is
you.
our gift to you. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And we've got chocolates and tissues and all kinds of good stuff for
thank you very much.
and a mug to remind you of the fact that we're celebrating what you're doing to change the world through the fact that you've let God work in your life to then be a light and shine light for other people in a way for God to keep working in their lives and giving them hope, which is absolutely beautiful.
And not just for the men who are struggling, but also for the women who are in the industry as well, for them to have the opportunity to come out of that, to see there's a person beyond that.
And that's why we talk about using the fertilizer
Of our past
to bloom today, like you will actually be blooming.
A free PDF copy of the Bloom in the Dark book and a full list of Bloom Today's coaching tools can be found on bloomtodaytv.com. Then visit Bloom Today's Facebook group for deeper conversation.